On the cold morning of February 1, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia vanished in a fireball above the Texas sky, and with it, 7 brilliant lives. But what seemed like a sudden, tragic accident was, in truth, a disaster decades in the making. One that NASA executives, engineers, and politicians all played a part in creating. Beneath the blazing reentry and shattered tiles lay a story of broken promises, budget cuts, and a culture that had grown numb to warning signs. Today, we peel back the layers of bureaucracy, engineering compromises, and human ambition to reveal why Columbia's final mission was not just a tragedy, but a preventable catastrophe that haunts space exploration even now. It starts with an ambitious dream in the Nixon White House on January 5, 1972. A vision to build a reusable spacecraft, a vehicle that could carry humanity routinely into orbit like a commercial airliner. NASA's chief administrator, James Fletcher, pitched a fully reusable shuttle, promising payloads for a fraction of Apollo costs. $1,000 per pound to orbit, they said, painting a picture of endless possibility. Yet behind that sleek promise lay the steel realities of the budget process. Nixon's budget office lopped 2/3 off the request, forcing NASA to adopt a half-reusable design. A giant external tank, jettisonable solid rocket boosters, and a disposable orbiter emerged not from innovation but from necessity. The shuttle that promised airline-style operations became, in fact, an expensive compromise whose operational costs never met the rosy projections. That decision, driven by immediate savings, set the stage for cascading design trade-offs. Engineers wrestled between high-pressure liquid boosters, promising lower launch costs at greater upfront expense, and cheaper solid-fuel rockets that guzzled money in the long run. In the end, NASA picked the cheaper build, today, pay more tomorrow option. By the time Columbia took shape at Rockwell Facilities in Palmdale, California, its tile-clad exterior hinted at fragility. 32,000 individually shaped silica panels, each as delicate as a snowflake yet critical against the inferno of reentry. Columbia outweighed her sister ships, a heavyweight behemoth burdened by compromises made long before her first launch. Through the late 1970s and early 1980s, NASA tested and tweaked. Enterprise, the prototype shuttle, endured perilous drop tests at Edwards Air Force Base. Spectators marveled as it detached from a 747 at 26,000 feet, gliding into a hard, bone-rattling landing. One bounce revealed flawed aerodynamics in the wing design, flaws that required costly fixes. Every delay, every red flag, and every scarce budget session chipped away at the ideal of seamless spaceflight. Yet NASA held fast, betting on their engineers' ingenuity and the public's willingness to trust in their promises. When Columbia finally soared into orbit in April 1981, hopes ran high. 2 days later, she touched down with only minor damage. 16 tiles missing, 148 more scraped. Those figures sent chills through mission control, yet were promptly labeled acceptable and tucked into reports as routine maintenance. Columbia was christened a success, and Congress, swayed by airline-like promises, continued steering taxpayer dollars toward a program that never proved cost-effective. Meanwhile, engineers grew accustomed to tile damage, flight after flight. Foam insulation strikes, chunks peeling off the external tank, became so common they earned their own jargons. Foam shedding. When foam struck tiles, breaching the orbiter's heat shield, it was logged and downplayed rather than investigated. The real warning came on January 28, 1986, With Challenger, a frozen O-ring in a solid rocket booster failed in the icy morning air, igniting a plume that tore the shuttle apart 73 seconds into flight. 7 lives lost. The nation held its breath. NASA grounded the fleet for 32 months. They redesigned joints, revamped safety protocols, and promised a new era of caution. But beneath that veneer of reform lurked old habits. Budgets remained tight, schedules still loomed. NASA's culture, praised for can-do spirit, also prized on-time launches above lingering doubts. Fast forward to the early 2000s. Columbia had flown 27 missions, a stalwart veteran carrying the Chandra X-ray Observatory, experiments on cancer cells, microgravity physics, and even ant behavior. Rick Husband, Kalpana Chawla, William McCool, Michael Anderson, David Brown, Laurel Clark, and Alan Rahman, 7 individuals bound by expertise and dreams of discovery. They trained in the Wyoming wilderness, bonded over survival drills, and forged unbreakable trust. They knew the risks, yet they also believed in the safeguards that NASA and America had built. Yet in those 27 missions, foam strikes occurred on 82% of flights. 79 documented events, each a tiny bullet whispering something was wrong. On STS-17's launch, a briefcase-sized chunk of foam shattered off the external tank just 81 seconds after liftoff, slamming into Columbia's left wing at over 500 miles per hour. Video from Mission Control captured the impact. Engineers watched closely, hearts pounding with suspicion. They asked for satellite imagery to inspect the damage. Management denied the request. "Nothing to see here," they said. Internal emails debated whether informing the crew would serve any purpose. Some worried it might hurt morale. Others argued the data didn't warrant action, and so the shuttle orbited Earth, blissfully unaware that a hole, small as a crayon box, had been punched through its thermal armor. For 16 days, Columbia's crew conducted over 80 experiments, ozone measurements, prostate cancer cell growth, metal alloy tests. The first flame experiments in microgravity, studies of bone density and bacteria, mapping desert dust storms. Their science was cutting edge, their camaraderie unshakable. Yet all the while, a hole widened imperceptibly in a wing panel, melting insulation, severing wires, and weakening structure. On re-entry, overheated gas poured into the breach. Alarms flashed. But within seconds, the shuttle lost control. At 8:59 a.m. Central, Columbia disintegrated at 200,000 feet. A debris rained down across Texas and Louisiana. A roar shook homes, and witness reports described streaks of fire across blue sky. Rescue and recovery became the largest search operation in U.S. history. But nothing could bring back those astronauts or rewrite the choices that condemned them. The Columbia investigation unfolded like a body of water slowly draining from a cracked dam. First the torrent of grief, then the creeping realization that every failure had a human hand guiding it. From the moment the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, CAIB, convened, their mandate was not merely to document what happened, but to ask why the shuttle program had reached a point where warning signs were dismissed as routine. As families mourned in quiet homes and memorials blossomed across the nation, NASA insiders whispered about broken processes, missing red flags, and a culture that prized schedule over substance. Engineers testified under oath that they had seen foam strikes since the earliest shuttle flights, that the words, "acceptable risk," had become a sort of mantra, repeated so often it lost all meaning. Memos circulated describing small breaches as "on family," events, vocabulary intended to comfort executives worried about delays. Yet for the astronauts aboard Columbia, one family had no place. They depended on insurance policies of metal and tile that were supposed to stand between them and the inferno of re-entry. Instead, those policies were torn page by choices made to save money, cut time, and maintain political momentum. Politicians, some of whom had cheered for the shuttle as the new dawn of spaceflight, now scrambled to assign blame. Congressional hearings replayed the same footage of foam buffeting Columbia's wing, showing it again and again until it felt like a haunting dream. Yet every time the images flickered on screen, an uncomfortable truth emerged. NASA managers were more worried about slipping launch windows than about a growing list of anomalies. When engineers asked for additional imaging from spy satellites, they were told to stand down. When they proposed a risky but possible in-orbit repair mission, they were cautioned that any delay would cost more than the mission itself. And when they begged to inform the crew, they encountered a wall of bureaucracy where operational security trumped crew safety. The Keb report would later call NASA's decision-making process broken, describing normalization of deviance as the lethal force that turned a technical lapse into a tragedy. That phrase, normalization of deviance, would echo through boardrooms and classrooms for years, a reminder that accepting minor violations sets a precedent for major disasters. It's the same principle that erodes integrity in any organization. Small compromises on principle grow until the entire system collapses under its own weight. In the months following the report, NASA undertook a massive overhaul. They rebuilt external tanks, redesigned insulation, and rewrote safety protocols in thick binders that lined the halls of mission control. They invested in new imagery systems, real-time tracking of debris, and cross-disciplinary teams meant to challenge groupthink. But more than hardware changes, they emphasized a shift in mindset, empowering engineers to speak up, requiring dissenting opinions to be heard, and establishing independent safety boards insulated from scheduling pressure. It was a cultural reboot born of tragedy, rooted in the conviction that no launch date justified putting humans at risk. Yet, even these reforms couldn't erase the sorrow or the lingering question: could the disaster have been prevented if just one person had refused to look away? The families of Husband, McCool, Chawla, Anderson, Brown, Clark, and Raymond didn't want policy memos. They wanted justice for broken trust. Schools and science centers sprouted up with their names, turning a moment of loss into a fountain of inspiration for new generations. Their stories of Rick Husband's calm leadership, Kalpana Chawla's pioneering spirit, and Laurel Clark's relentless curiosity, shone as beacons of human potential and the price we pay when systems fail us. At the same time, the Columbia legacy began shaping the future of space exploration. When private companies pitched their own reusable vehicles, investors and engineers alike could point to Columbia's lessons. Don't cut corners, invest in redundant safety systems, and never let budgetary fear override common sense. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others would routinely cite the key AI findings in design reviews, refusing to normalize any new deviation from safety margins. The result: rockets and capsules built with an almost obsessive attention to critical failure points, sensors everywhere, and dozens of backup plans to cover every conceivable contingency. But the shadow of Columbia still lingers. In 2020, mysterious debris was found near a commercial launch site, and engineers recoiled at the sight of insulation foam fragments that bore an uncanny resemblance to the kinds that doomed Columbia. Social media buzzed with posts warning of a second Columbia, and NASA veterans raised alarms about a potential drift back toward old habits. Even as the Artemis program promises to return humans to the moon and eventually send astronauts to Mars, whispers of the past remind every engineer that the greatest hazard in spaceflight is complacency. Looking back, the Columbia disaster stands as both a cautionary tale and a testament to human resilience. It drives home the truth that any mission is only as safe as its weakest link, be it a wafer, thin tile, or a button in a control room that never gets pushed. But it also shows what happens when a community comes together to learn from its mistakes, refusing to let 7 brave souls perish in vain. Their names now grace craters on Mars, asteroids in the belt, and robotics labs aimed at the stars. And so, as we stand on the cusp of a new era, Mars capsules and lunar gateways, space stations in private hands, Columbia's legacy endures. It's a story woven through spacecraft blueprints and mission briefings, a constant reminder that exploration demands vigilance. Every date circled on a calendar, every launch pad countdown, must keep alive the memory of a wing struck by foam and the voices that fell silent too soon. In honoring their sacrifice, we reaffirm the promise of spaceflight that humanity will rise, wiser and more cautious, to meet the endless frontier. In the years following Columbia's final flight, NASA's halls echoed with both determination and regret. The painful memory of 7 lives lost refocused every discussion around launch safety and organizational culture. Engineers who once shrugged off minor anomalies now double-checked every data point, re-examined every tile location, and questioned even the smallest deviations. The once casual phrase, "This is within acceptable limits," was replaced by continuous debate. What if? What if the pattern repeats? Each morning briefing began with a detailed review of previous launches, foam incidents, and tile inspections. Mission rules evolved to demand hard stops whenever risk thresholds approached their margins. No longer could any launch proceed without unanimous sign-off from an independent safety panel that reported directly to the administrator. This change alone saved multiple missions that otherwise might have flown under old assumptions. Flight controllers now had explicit authority to delay launches if the slightest doubt arose in their minds or on their screens. Simultaneously, NASA's leadership unleashed a wave of technological upgrades. High-resolution ground cameras and radar surveys tracked every piece of foam shed during ascent. Automated analytics flagged anomalies across, referencing them against a database built from decades of video logs and incident reports. If a chunk of insulation foam larger than a matchbox dislodged, the software sent red alerts to everyone from the flight director to the White House liaison. Satellites once reserved for military reconnaissance were repurposed for orbital inspections, orbiting above shuttle trajectories to capture detailed images. Within minutes of launch, engineers could scroll through dozens of angles, zooming in on vulnerable wing sections and tile joints. If anything looked even slightly out of place, cameras aboard the station or rendezvous vehicles would be readied for a hands-on scan. When Elon Musk's Falcon rockets proved reusable, their success underscored the importance of rapid turnaround inspections and sensory redundancies. elements Columbia's program had sorely lacked. As commercial space companies surged, NASA embraced partnerships but stayed vigilant. Contracts now specified rigorous safety audits and joint verification steps. Even SpaceX, with its unparalleled launch cadence, paused when they detected anomalies in grid fins or heat shield panels. They learned that saving a few minutes on inspection time could cost exponentially more later. Their Falcon 9 booster inspections became legendary for microscope-level detail. Every stainless steel weld on Starship prototypes was X-rayed. Every composite material sample subjected to thermal stress tests in vacuum chambers. This level of scrutiny emerged directly from Columbia's lessons. Failure to interrogate assumptions breeds catastrophe. Investors who once demanded productivity over prudence now accepted that the price of trust in human flight is eternal vigilance. By the time Artemis missions began, NASA had woven Columbia's legacy into every aspect of planning. Command modules carried sensors capable of detecting micrometeoroid impacts in real time. Deep space communication relays now monitored hull stress and panel integrity during lunar splashdowns. The Artemis I mission, uncrewed but fully instrumented, orbited the Moon for days, while thousands of data streams were scrutinized on the ground. Any deviation in temperature or vibration triggered executive briefings. When Artemis SUPI prepares to send astronauts around the lunar sphere, flight rules will be stricter than any in history. Abort corridors, return trajectories, landing zones. They have been mapped with micron-level precision. Government officials, once obsessed over schedules, now recognize that launching on time matters far less than returning home alive. Throughout all this technical progress, NASA preserved the human stories at Columbia's heart. Each astronaut's personal effects, archived in climate-controlled vaults, remind staffers why every sensor reading matters. Letters from schoolchildren, donated to the Museum of Flight in Seattle, urge the agency to keep its promise: explore, but never at the cost of lives. Annual memorial events at Arlington National Cemetery gather families, engineers, and newly graduated recruits. They share accounts of resilience, recount how grief fueled innovation, and recommit to the mantra, "We remember so we never repeat." Across the industry, conferences feature plenary sessions on the Columbia Imperative. Speakers dissect every decision, from Nixon's budget cuts to the final slashes of foam that doomed STS-107. Young engineers memorize the key AIB report's recommendations as rites of passage. They debate what normalization of deviance means in the age of machine learning, where autonomous systems might override human operators if they detect risk. Ethical panels ask whether trust in AI could ever exceed trust in human judgment. The consensus: neither can be infallible, and neither should be trusted without continuous oversight. As we look to Mars, private astronauts and government crews alike carry Columbia's story with them. They study archived footage of debris fields that once stretched across Texas plains, and they train for contingencies. Repair robots, spacewalk drills, remote robot class inspection routines. They know that any mission beyond low Earth orbit magnifies risks by orders of magnitude. Solar storms, radiation darkening, micrometeoroid swarms, all present dangers that mirror Columbia's unheeded warnings. Yet every one of them also understands that fear of failure cannot stop exploration. The legacy of Columbia demands both caution and courage in equal measure. In classrooms and startups, documentaries and design labs, Columbia's ghosts linger. They guide decisions on launch windows, material selection, mission profiles, and remote diagnostics. They remind every spaceflight professional that success is measured not by records set or milestones achieved, but by the safe return of every astronaut. And for the families of the Valentine Station crew, every new discovery in space is both a tribute and a reminder 7 fell so countless others could rise. As rockets light up launch pads around the globe, the Columbia imperative remains clear. Embrace the frontier with humility, respect every warning sign, and never accept the price of human life as a variable in budget spreadsheets. Even now, when you watch a shuttle launch or track a commercial crew mission, a voice in the back of your mind recalls Columbia's final moments, reminding engineers, managers, and viewers alike that every detail matters. Those early foam strikes were dismissed as minor nuisances. Family, glitches that could be patched or ignored. But they were the first echoes of a much larger failure, the day-to-day acceptance of risk without robust challenge. Today, that lesson is woven into pre-flight checklists, risk registers, and run decision gates that stretch for miles in procedural manuals. Before a single bolt is torqued or a tank is loaded with propellant, hundreds of eyes pore over charts, tables, and images, reminding everyone that complacency kills. Across the globe, space agencies have adopted multi-tiered review processes inspired by Columbia's CAIB recommendations. European crews launch aboard Russian vehicles, Indian missions lift off on indigenous rockets, and Japanese astronauts board private spacecraft. In every case, independent safety boards act as guardians, empowered to override schedules and budgets if a single key metric drifts beyond allowable bounds. Those panels comprise industry veterans, academic experts, and even ethicists charged with asking uncomfortable questions. What if the anomaly is just the tip of an iceberg? How can we test for the unknown unknowns? Would a last-minute postponement hurt more than it helps? If Columbia taught us anything, it's that honest debate and dissent are not signs of weakness, but the very foundation of safe exploration. Meanwhile, technological advances have given modern missions tools that Columbia's engineers could only dream of. High-fidelity digital twins simulate heat shield performance down to individual tile granularity. Machine learning algorithms sift through terabytes of flight telemetry, flagging patterns invisible to human eyes. Augmented reality goggles allow technicians to project internal structures onto hardware, identifying wiring faults or microfracture points without unscrewing a single panel. On-orbit drones, small robotic inspectors equipped with ultrasonic and thermal cameras, sweep around spacecraft, revealing tiny cracks before they blossom into catastrophe. These breakthroughs stem from a collective vow: never again will a microsecond-long piece of foam decide the fate of 7 lives. Despite these advances, the story of Columbia remains a human one. It's about Rick Husband pausing to admire Earth's curvature before tragedy struck, about Kalpana Chawla sharing her wonder at witnessing Sol Gel crystal formation in zero gravity,